The war in Ukraine has reached a turning point. What's crucial is the timing as world leaders converge at the United Nations General Assembly in New York. Hello and a very warm welcome to World 360 with me, Akanksha Swaroop. We'll dive deep into the changing world of geopolitics. But first up are the headlines. NATO vows more support for Ukraine. This as referendum begins in Russia-occupied regions of Ukraine soon after Putin announced partial mobilization. More than 1,300 arrested in Russia's anti-war demonstrations. World leaders address the United Nations General Assembly. Iran and the US clash on nuclear deal and human rights issues, while India slams Pak Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif's speech for raking up Kashmir. And Iran restricts internet. This as deaths related to Mahsa Amini's protests mount, and the United Nations calls for investigation into Amini's custodial death. So Russia and Ukraine take center stage on our show today. Russian President Vladimir Putin has raised the nuclear specter in Ukraine. And not just that, he has ordered partial mobilization of forces, a first for Russia since World War II. An issue that was also addressed at the UNGA by Ukraine's president. What could Putin's decision mean for the war in Ukraine and its Western partners? We delve deep in the following report. Vladimir Putin sent shockwaves across Russia and the international community. This as he ordered the country's first mobilization since World War II.
Russian citizens can be sure that the territorial integrity of our homeland, our independence and freedom will be provided. I will stress once again, with all the means at our disposal, those who try to blackmail us with nuclear weapons should know that the wind can turn their way.
What followed were anti-war demonstrations, these denouncing Putin's decree. More than 1,300 have been arrested, and those who aren't protesting are fleeing. Flights out of Russia rocketed in price. The attention soon shifted to the UN General Assembly's 77th session. In his address, the US President Joe Biden declared Russia's invasion of Ukraine a violation of the global order.
Russia has shamelessly violated the core tenets of the United Nations Charter. No more important than the clear prohibition against countries taking the territory of their neighbor by force.
The reactions didn't stop at that. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's pre-recorded speech outlined a 5-point peace plan that included punishment for aggression and security guarantees. Zelensky also demanded that Russia be punished for its crimes in Ukraine.
A crime has been committed against Ukraine, and we demand just punishment. The crime was committed against our state borders. The crime was committed against the values that make you and me a community of the United Nations. And Ukraine demands punishment for trying to steal our territory.
It should be noted that Putin's mobilization is no ordinary development. Firstly, it is a direct escalation of the conflict, one that would involve 300,000 additional personnel to fight in Ukraine. Secondly, it comes days after news of Russia losing ground in parts of northeastern and southern Ukraine. This includes Ukraine's advancement at lightning speed in Kharkiv and Kherson. What's surprising is that it was only last week that Putin had hinted at ending the war. This during his bilateral with Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi at the SCO summit in Uzbekistan. Nonetheless, India has maintained its tough stance on Russia at the UNGA too.
The trajectory of the Ukraine conflict is a matter of profound concern for the entire international community. The future outlook appears even more disturbing. The nuclear issue is a particular anxiety.
In the meantime, the Kremlin has begun referendums in Ukraine's Moscow-occupied regions. These include 4 regions: Luhansk, Donetsk, Kherson and Zaporizhia. The vote will lead to Russia's formal annexation of swaths of territory, something already done in the case of Crimea in 2014. Russia's move has already received Western condemnation. Perhaps because the vote will only escalate the war between Russia and Ukraine, backed by the NATO military alliance, only raising the dreaded possibility of World War III. Bureau Report, CNN News 18. And so this is the turning point in the war between Russia and Ukraine. But what does it mean for Russia and for the Western allies of Ukraine? Let's try and get in a sense of perspective. And for that, I'm joined in by CNN's Claire Sebastian, who's joining us live from London with more. Many thanks to you, Claire, for joining our broadcast today. Now, Claire, Putin's partial mobilization has sparked protests across Russia. Over 1,000 have been arrested. What will Putin's military call-up possibly mean for Russia and the war?
Yeah, so for the war, I think it's not exactly clear what this means yet. Experts will tell you that even if they do manage to call up 300,000 people, as the defense minister said, that will happen in waves and it will take some time to get them trained up and onto the battlefield. So certainly if you look at the comment today from the Institute for the Study of War, which is a think tank, they believe that this will be just enough forces to offset Russian casualties on the battlefield, not enough to turn the tide. So it's not exactly clear that this will change Russia's fortunes on the battlefield, but it will most likely allow them to keep going for longer in this war, which of course sets up a challenge for Ukraine. But as for Russia itself, we are seeing a bit of a sea change. For the first time in about 6 months, we're seeing protests, anti-war protests on the streets. More than 1,300 people as of Thursday have been arrested, according to the independent monitoring group OVD Info. That is, a relatively small number based on what we saw at the beginning of the war. But given the climate in Russia, the criminalization of even calling this a war, the intensifying of penalties for things like evading military service and desertion, it is significant. These people who are showing up on the streets are demonstrating significant bravery. We're also seeing signs of queues at the border and increased demand for flights and an increase in prices for flights. So you do get the sense anecdotally at this stage that there is a growing tide of panic. So far in this war, it really hasn't affected the everyday lives of Russians that much. It appears now that is changing. Even though this is a partial mobilization, even though it's only really people so far who have served in the military, who have some military experience, most people will know someone who is at least believed to be eligible. So this is now hitting home for Russians.
All right. Also, Claire, after reclaiming major territories, Ukraine has now reached a turning point in this war. But with Putin now resorting to partial mobilization, even threats of nuclear retaliation and referendums in Russian-backed territories of Ukraine, what are the challenges ahead for President Volodymyr Zelensky?
Yeah, Ukraine has had a significant turnaround in the last couple of weeks. They were able to take a lot of territory, about 8,000 square kilometers in the east of the country, in this counter-offensive that was such a tactical victory over Russia. Now the progress has seemed to slow in the last week or so. They are still moving forward, but at a much slower pace. Russia is also fighting back in some areas, making very small gains. So the challenge for President Zelensky, is that, especially in the face of Russian mobilization, is to try to keep up the momentum, and he needs to do so, of course, with continued support from the West. He spoke to the UN General Assembly. He's garnering support. He's trying to make sure that he can continue to get that support and that supply of weapons from the West, which has made such a difference on the battlefield. And the other part of this for President Zelensky, because wherever you see Russia retreat in this war, where Ukraine has been able to take back territory, we saw it at the beginning of the war in April with Bucha and the areas around Kiev, you do see more and more evidence of Russian atrocities. We just saw it with the city of Izium, where more than 400 unmarked graves were found, mainly Ukrainian civilians. He wants Russia held to account. He has been demanded that they remove their UN veto power. He wants a tribunal set up to hold them to account, and he is going to continue to put pressure on the global community to do that, to try to tighten the screws in that way.
Right, and understandably so. Many thanks to you, Claire, for bringing in all those details and for putting that story into perspective for us. And with that, let's now shift our attention to the 77th session of the UNGA in New York. India has reacted sharply to Pakistan Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif's speech. Sharif had raked up the Kashmir issue once again. He said, and I quote verbatim, India's illegal and unilateral occupation of the Kashmiri people and its ruthless campaign against Kashmiris hampers the cause of peace between the two countries. And so, India delivered a sharp response to Pakistan, stating that a country claiming to seek peace with its neighbours would never sponsor cross-border terrorism. Let's listen in to what the First Secretary of the Indian Mission to the UN had to say.
It is regrettable that the Prime Minister of Pakistan has chosen the platform of this August Assembly to make false accusations against India. A polity that claims it seeks peace with its neighbors would never sponsor cross-border terrorism, nor would it shelter planners of the horrific Mumbai terrorist attack.
Pakistan has once again raised up the issue of Kashmir at United Nations. On Friday, when Pakistan Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif was addressing the United Nations 77th General Assembly, where he blamed India for all the crisis, he also said that India is responsible for the persecution or oppression of Kashmiri minorities. He said that the decision of India to change the status of Kashmir, mentioning the abrogation of Article 370, would further not let peace to stabilize between India and Pakistan. Whenever they get an opportunity at any world stage, they do try to raise this issue of Kashmir and play a victim card.
And with that, let's now shift our attention over to the country of Iran. The situation in Iran continues to remain tense. This as Iranian authorities have restricted internet access across the entire country. Also, this until peace is restored, but anger against authorities over the death of 22-year-old Mahsa Amini continues to grow. Thousands of Iranians are now on the streets protesting and demanding the removal of the morality police. They are also demanding an end to discrimination against women as well as an end to compulsory wearing of the hijab. Dozens of individuals have been killed during the police crackdown on these protests. Meanwhile, Iran's president has called for an investigation into the death of Amini. Let's also try and get in a sense of perspective in terms of what this could mean for Iran and how serious the situation is on the ground level. And for that, I'm joined in by CNN's Jumana Karadche, who's joining me live from Turkey right now. Jumana, the anti-hijab protests in Iran are only intensifying, perhaps because women in Iran have clearly had enough. Could you tell us more about Iran's morality police and their tactics that they have resorted to in the past decades?
Well, so the morality police, they are part of the security forces in the country. They certainly have been empowered in recent years by the hardline leadership in the country. They are the security forces that are tasked with enforcing the country's really strict Islamic dress code, whether it's the headscarf or the loose-fitting clothing that women should be wearing. They have access to power, to weapons, to detention facilities in the country. And in recent years, we have seen these so-called re-education centers popping up in the country, run by the morality police. And these centers, by all accounts, are pretty much detention facilities where women are taken once they're in the custody of the morality police. They have to go through guidance or lessons, as they describe it, over the proper way of dressing and what they need to do. But, by all accounts, these are detention facilities where women are treated like criminals, like detainees. We've heard in recent months the United Nations saying that there have been arise in these allegations, and also documented incidents by the UN of women saying that they have been beaten up, that they have been ill-treated while in the custody of the morality police. So when we look at what has been going on the ground in Iran right now, there's no surprise that we're seeing this sort of outrage and anger on the streets. This was sparked by the death of Mahsa Amini,
right,
and the questions surrounding the circumstances of her death.
All right. And talking about the circumstances surrounding her death, Jumana, Amini's father has also said that authorities have been lying about her death. Could you throw more light on what Amini's family has to say?
So the Iranian authorities have really been pushing the narrative since last week that Mahsa Amini, a 22-year-old young woman, died, they say, of a heart attack. They say that she collapsed while in that re-education center, fell into a coma, and died 3 days later. They even released an edited CCTV video that they say shows her collapsing in the center. The authorities say that they are investigating her death, that they've carried out an autopsy, that they're reviewing right now, but they have not published that yet. Her family, on the other hand, we've heard her father speaking to BBC Persia. We've also spoken to a cousin of Mahsa Amini who is in Norway, and the family believes that the authorities are covering up the truth. They say that they are lying, that this is not what happened. They say that she was a healthy 22-year-old. She had no pre-existing heart conditions, and they say that her brother saw her getting beaten up as she was being pushed into the back of the morality police van. So they really are accusing the morality police here. They are blaming them for the death of this young woman. But what we're really seeing now on the streets is what started as these protests calling for justice, for accountability, for the truth about what happened to Mahsa Amini really snowball into these protests, into something that is much more than that, where you have all these young men and women who are saying enough is enough.
Absolutely. Many thanks to you, Jumana, for putting that entire story into perspective for us. Now, interestingly, CNN's Christiane Amanpour was slated to hold an interview with Iran's President Ibrahim Raisi in New York just some days ago, but it was soon cancelled. This after she was asked to wear a headscarf. Let's listen in to what Christiane Amanpour's account is of what actually happened.
It's very unsettling because we were going to have the first exclusive here in New York. He'd already done an interview in Iran with 60 Minutes where the headscarf was also an issue. But there, because it is the custom, one always does wear the headscarf when one's there. That's just, otherwise you couldn't operate as a journalist. Here in New York or anywhere else outside of Iran, I have never been asked by any Iranian president, and I have interviewed every single one of them since 1995. And most importantly, we want to talk about the violation of human rights. At the very end, they come up with this, you know, it's a religious month of mourning and we need you to wear a headscarf. And I very politely declined on behalf of myself and CNN and female journalists everywhere. It was lobbed at us at the very last minute. And very unfortunately, they decided to pull the interview. I think that he did not want to be seen with a female without a headscarf in this moment, either because he calls it a religious month or because people would say, how come he's sitting down with a foreign journalist who's not wearing a headscarf, and yet inside Iran they're cracking down on young women who are not wearing their headscarves. But the fact of the matter is the women are wearing their headscarves. Sometimes in protest they take them off.
And since we're discussing Iran, let's quickly shift our focus back to the UNGA. Earlier this week, the United States and Iran clashed over the issues of security and even human rights at the UNGA. This included the ongoing protests in Iran. United States President Joe Biden said that the nation stands with the brave women of Iran who are demonstrating to secure their basic rights. Raisi on the other hand, cried double standards when it comes to human rights. He cited reports of migrant children being caged by the U.S. government. Raisi also said that ex-U.S. President Donald Trump should face trial over the 2020 killing of Iran's top commander, Qasem Soleimani. And so let's try and get in a sense of perspective what this clash was all about, especially when it comes to the nuclear deal. And for that, I'm joined in by Mr. Saeed Mohammad Marandi, who's an Iranian expert and is currently joining us live from Tehran. Thank you so much, Mr. Marandi, for joining in on our show. Now, in what's being called a showdown, the presidents of Iran and United States have criticized each other's policy in their UNGA speeches. Is there still hope for a nuclear deal in the recent future?
It really depends on the United States. We all have to remember that it was the United States that violated the 2015 nuclear deal from day one under Obama, and that those violations were systematic. And then Trump tore up the deal. During this period of time, and even up to a year after Trump tore up the deal, the Iranians were implementing it in full. So while Iran was abiding by all of its obligations, the United States and the Europeans were not abiding by any of their obligations. So right now at the negotiating table, the Iranians have been saying that we are willing to go back and re-implement the deal. But this time, we have to make sure that the United States and the Europeans don't cheat Iran again, that they are forced to abide by their commitments, and that if they violate their commitments, it comes at a cost.
All right. Many thanks to you, Mr. Marandi, for sharing in your precious views. And with that, it's time to head into a quick break, but we'll be back with the details of the communal clashes that have taken place in the United Kingdom. Stay with us.